Man Up, a program dedicated to inspiring and helping men live lives of heroic virtue. And now, it's time to man up.
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. We are broadcasting on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And today, we're going to take a little break, a small break from the Heroic Marriage series to revisit an episode I did 4 years ago when it was an election season of 2020 on why I cannot vote pro-choice. And I remember doing this vividly. I've had good feedback on it actually over the years. And it's one that I just recently listened to just to make sure that I still agreed with everything I said. And I think it speaks to me as much today as it did back then. And I thought it was worth revisiting as we are now in election season 2024. Let us start in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So we are now in the midst of another chaotic presidential election, among other elections, right? So we have our local elections. And, I would say I was very into politics as a kid. And I read a lot of books on politics, and I will say my love of politics has really dwindled pretty significantly over the course of my life. And I'm not sure if that has to do with the choices of candidates that I've been given, or just my as I become older, I realize just how corrupt a lot of this stuff is. I don't know. I have less hope in the system maybe than I did previously. That said, it is obviously we are blessed in America to have the system we have, to have the ability to vote for our leaders, to have a say, especially at the local level, of how our government runs. And all that to say, as much as I try to stay out of politics, and I do try to stay out of it because it's so toxic nowadays, it's still incumbent upon us, and actually even more incumbent upon us as devout Catholics and Christians. We have to have our voices heard, and we have to be out there in the forefront of these issues. And so, again, I look forward to having good Catholic leaders and being able to vote them and being able to support them. But in the meantime, I'd done this talk in 2020 entitled "Why I Cannot Vote Pro-Choice," and it was this reflection I had that even if I agreed with a certain candidate, the pro-choice issue to me is so black and white. It's so good and evil. It really isn't. There's just no wiggle room for me on it. And so we're going to head to a short break. I'll let myself from 4 years ago talk through my thoughts on it. I think it still stands today, especially in light of the upcoming election. So stick around. We'll head to a short break, and we'll be right back.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Bozen the Florist. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, weddings, whatever the message, say more with Bozen. Bozen.com, 515-244-ROSE. Bozen makes the moment mean more. Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Mercy One. We all want to live our best life. That's why Mercy One offers compassionate, personalized care when and where you need it. Schedule online at mercyone.org.
Support for programming has been provided by Marr Security Services, a family-owned security company that provides full-service security solutions to homes and businesses throughout the Midwest. Learn more at permarsecurity.com. Thank you, Marr Security Services, for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio.
Fast Signs is a custom sign and visual solutions company with an extensive selection of digital signage, interior and exterior signs, banners, and vehicle wraps. Learn more at fastsigns.com. Thank you, Fast Signs in Clive, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support provided by Divine Treasures, a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community since 1992. Divine Treasures, 5701 Hickman Road, Des Moines, 515-255-5230. Thank you, Divine Treasures, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by the Sarah Vocations Ministry. Sarah is an apostolate dedicated to the support of new and existing vocations to the priesthood and consecrated life. Learn more at joinsarah.org, joinserra.org.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory. Caldwell Parish offers services that are unique to the individual while following the Catholic funeral rites. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory, Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home.
The next Man Up West Power Lunch is at noon, Friday, November 8th, at St. Francis of Assisi in West Des Moines. Father Matthew Luft from St. Pius X in Urbandale will share his experience from a recently completed pilgrimage to Lourdes, Fatima, and the Camino de Santiago. Lunch is provided. Learn more at iowacatholicradio.com.
My help comes from you. You're right.
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I had been asked to do a Catholic Voter's Guide edition to the show. And initially, I rejected the idea because of just the polarization of the topic and the fact that usually those conversations tend to stay very high level and really not get into any actionable steps. The more I thought and prayed about it, one issue continued to come to light, and this is it. That if we could draw up the perfect Catholic political candidate for office, a person of integrity and virtue, who followed all the teachings of the Church and was bold in standing up for those convictions, a person who on paper I voted, who I believe would vote 100% of the way the Catholic Church would have us vote. If this person existed, but happened to have one notable exception to being in line with the teachings of the Christ and His Church, that exception being in favor of abortion rights, I couldn't vote for them. Even if every single other issue was perfectly in line with the Church, I could not vote for them. And even if they had the most upstanding personal moral character, I still could not vote for them. And the more I thought about this, the more I could not help shake that notion. And I've never been really a single issue voter, but I think of it like this. If today that person I described was, instead of being pro-abortion, was pro-slavery, could you vote for them? If they agreed 100% with you on every other issue, but just happened to slip up on the one issue of slavery, would you vote for them? I do not think this is an apples and oranges conversation or comparison. Both of those are clearly mortal sins. Both of them are a disgrace to our country. And both of them are an outrage before the Lord. The reason we do not think this way is because of the culture that we live in. The Founding Fathers knew that slavery was against the moral order. They spoke out against it. They also knew that we would never be able to form the Union without the Southern states if we didn't allow it. Thomas Jefferson famously said that about slavery, he said, I'll quote him here, "But as it is, we have the wolf by the ears, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in on one scale, and self-preservation is on the other." So while they knew it was wrong, they pushed it off to the following generations of leaders to fix it. And instead of being fixed in the following generation, unfortunately, the slave trade grew exponentially and therefore made it more difficult to stop. Here's a quote from a book I recently read on the topic. It said, "Thanks to the South's total reliance on slavery and the growing anti-slavery sentiment in the North, the arguments regarding slavery began to change. Southern advocates began to argue the morality of slavery, particularly John C. Calhoun, who was an ardent white supremacist. He insisted that the federal government should enshrine slavery for all time and force free states to return to escaped slaves, and therefore allow expansion of slavery into the new territories." Here's the part I want you to know. The positive argument for slavery was actually a new development. Before the rise of abolitionism, even the slaveholder and tolerated but derided the immorality of slavery. Calhoun famously stated that the key tenet of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, produced quote-unquote poisonous fruit, and such argument that slaves ought to be free, end quote. From slaveholders like Thomas Jefferson to George Washington, they understood that it was not moral, but they tolerated it. But that landscape shifted over time to a vehement promotion of the goods of slavery. I believe a similar thing has happened on the issue of abortion. Not too long ago, during my childhood, Bill Clinton talked about abortion rights in the context of safe, legal, and rare. Today, we hear things like shout your abortion. We hear that it's a positive good for society. We hear that it is health care. The days of safe, legal, and rare are long gone on the pro-abortion side, which isn't totally surprising. Safe and legal makes sense, but rare would imply that we do not want to have them for some reason. It would mean that there is something in abortion that would lend itself to wanting to be rare. That is heresy today. At least the people on the pro-abortion side 30 years ago were able to admit it is something we do not want to see the proliferation of. They understood rightly that it is not a good thing. But as the progressive movement has shifted the landscape, those people have been left behind. And today, like slavery in the South in the 1850s, it is seen as a positive good. The progressives in favor of abortion have changed the language such that it numbs you to actually what's taking place. Again, now it is health care. It's a woman's right to choose instead of what it actually is, which is the murdering of unborn persons. The same thing happened during the years of slavery. In order to numb society to the evils of slavery, the pro-abortion contingent purposely used language to help desensitize people to the atrocity. Okay, I'm going to quote a few things here. I'm going to warn you that the following language is extremely offensive and should serve to I'm using it to remind you of the atrocity of slavery and the mindset that enabled it. Back in the days of slavery, blacks were called the dregs of humanity. They were considered exactly intermediate between the superior order of beasts, such as elephant, dog, and orangutan, and the European or white men. Other slave owners referred to slaves as ignorant, brutality, obscenity, animal appetites, viciousness, and illegitimacy, and called them ignorant, perverse, wicked, the pests of white men, and the agents of Satan. Obviously, horrible, dehumanizing language to talk about other human beings made in the image and likeness of God. Something that we obviously today, standing in 2020, hear and are appalled by. Well, today in America, the same dehumanizing terms are being used in an effective weapon against the preborn. The following terms are used by anti-life writers to describe the unborn, these are actually from pro-abortion literature. They liken babies to like fingernail clippings or warts, the products of conception, the contents of the uterus. They're like worms or maggots. They're blobs of tissues, parasites, leeches. It's like a kind of venereal disease. These types of deceptions keep you from realizing what the horrors of abortion are, and they completely dehumanize it. Here's an actual summary of what happens in abortion. Again, this is rather graphic, but I think it's important for us to understand. This is in up to 16 weeks. A woman's cervix is dilated, and a suction instrument with a blade-like tip is inserted into the uterus. The placenta and the embryo or fetus is cut into pieces and suctioned out. Again, this is usually performed up to 16 weeks gestation. In a dilation and extraction procedure, and that's the second trimester, a woman's cervix this is extremely graphic, but I have to read it for you to understand what's going on. A woman's cervix is dilated for approximately 2 days before delivery with absorbent laminaria that is inserted into the entrance of the uterus. The day of the surgery, they are removed, and the membranes are ruptured. An ultrasound is used to locate the fetus's position in the womb. The doctor locates the fetus's lower extremities, inserts large, grasping forceps through the vagina and cervical canal into the uterus where he can grasp the child's legs. A leg is pulled through the vagina until the lower extremities, torso, shoulder, and upper extremities are delivered. The child is situated spine up, face down, with the head lodged at the opening of the cervix. There is usually not enough dilation for the skull to pass through. The doctor runs his fingers along the spine to find the base of the skull. Blunt, curved scissors are then inserted into the skull and spread to enlarge the opening. The scissors are removed, and a suction catheter is inserted into the skull to remove the brain. The head collapses, and the now dead child is delivered. The placenta is removed with forceps, and a suction curette is used to scrape the uterine wall for any tissue left in the womb. This procedure can be performed from 20 weeks of pregnancy until the full term, so 20 weeks up to 40 weeks. That is not health care. This is not a women's right. This is not a positive good for society. This is murder, plain and simple. But we, like the people who grew up in the South in the 1800s, have been purposely deceived and desensitized. Like the people in the South in the 1800s, we have been told that these are not human beings. We have been told that this is a positive good for society. And they've been successful in doing this. Since 2017, approximately 18% of U.S. pregnancies have ended in abortion. In 2016, approximately 34% of all pregnancies in New York City ended in abortion. 34%. More than 60 million legal abortions have been performed in the United States since Roe v. Wade in 1973. 60 million. That is the population of the entire state of Iowa 20 times. It's the equivalent of the entire metro area, not the city, but the metro area of New York, L.A., Chicago, Dallas, Houston, and Phoenix combined. The numbers are staggering. 60 million children who never had an opportunity to live. It's almost impossible to grab your head around those numbers. This issue is also personal to me, and I've had a lot of time to think about this. Actually, while I was spending the night in the hospital after the birth of my 5th child a few weeks ago and couldn't really sleep, I had a lot of time to dwell on this issue. I have heard the heartbeats of all of my children at 8 weeks. I've seen them all in their 20-week ultrasound, and for anyone who has not seen a 20-week ultrasound, you're basically watching a fully formed human being on a TV screen. Head, arms, feet, toes, spine, heart, face, nose, everything. It's an incredible moment. In addition to my own children, I have a niece and nephew who both gave me a new perspective on the issue of abortion. During my sister's 3rd pregnancy, a test early on revealed that her child was going to be born with some serious complications and special needs. This news was obviously not expected, but we all banded together and embraced what was going to be a life-changing situation for my sister and brother-in-law and our entire family. And it's in situations like this where abortions are common, where a person who is not as strong as my sister to make a life-affirming decision, or someone who has been told that it is just a clump of cells, or someone who has been convinced by the pro-abortion movement that this child is better off not being born, and you are doing them a favor. As the pregnancy progressed, none of the signs changed, and while we held out hope for a healthy child, we prepared for the arrival of our special needs family member. Fast forward a few months, and when she was born, she was a perfectly healthy baby girl. Grace is also my goddaughter. I shudder to think how many Graces are not alive today because of a faulty test. Because of a society that says if you're not perfect in the world's eyes, you are not worth being in the world. Because of a child being born, a burden is too much to bear, and you're encouraged to discard them in order to concentrate on your career or other aspirations. Another example of my life is my nephew Alex. My sister-in-law unexpectedly went into labor around 24 weeks. And for those of you who don't have kids, that is about halfway through the pregnancy. My wife and I honestly don't even start talking about names until after 24 weeks. Point being, it's extremely early in a pregnancy. Luckily for us and for them, they live 45 minutes from the University of Iowa Children's Hospital. She gave birth to our nephew Alexander, and he weighed in at 1 pound at 8 ounces and could fit into your hand. That said, he was just a little person, not a potential person, not a clump of cells. He was a person, albeit a very, very little person. Today, he is a perfectly healthy 6-year-old. He has 0 complications. He might honestly be the most energetic and smiley 6-year-old I know. But the pro-abortion movement would say that children at 24 weeks are not children. They don't have the right to live if their mother does not want them to live. This is demonic. It's actually demonic. When you see my nephew Alex and my niece Grace, and you look at their faces and realize how many millions of children like them do not exist today under the guise of a right to choose or woman's right or health care. As I've said before, we are a product of the culture we live in. Every one of us is inherently influenced by our surroundings. Just like the people who were in favor of slavery in the 1800s, I have empathy for many of the pro-choice people that are around today. It's easy to sit here in 2020 and look down on all the people who were pro-slavery. Earlier this year, a favorite thinker of mine, Robert P. George, who is a professor at Princeton, wrote this. Sometimes I ask students what the position on slavery would have been if they were white and living in the South before abolition. And guess what? They all would have been abolitionists. They all would have bravely spoken out against slavery and worked tirelessly against it. This, of course, is nonsense. Only the tiniest fraction of them, or any of us, would have spoken up against slavery or lifted a finger to free the slaves. Most of them and us would have gone along. Many would have supported the slave system and happily benefited from it. So I say in response that I will credit their claims if they can show evidence of the following. That in leading their lives today, they have stood up for the rights of unpopular victims of injustice whose very humanity is denied. And where they have done so knowing that 1, it would make them unpopular with their peers, 2, that they would be loathed and ridiculed by powerful, influential individuals and institutions in our society, 3, that they would be abandoned by many of their friends, 4, that they would be called nasty names, and 5, that they would risk being denied valuable professional opportunities as a result of their moral witness. In short, my challenge is to show them where they have, at risk to themselves and their future, stood up for a cause that is unpopular in elite sectors of our culture today. It's with that context of history that I personally do not fully condemn. I can't condemn people for having views at certain times. I would like to think that many of those same people, if alive today, would be horrified at the stances they had, but were products of the culture that they lived in and grew up in. I believe that just as we look back at the 1800s with the horror, the sins of slavery in our nation, And just as we look back at child sacrifice rituals of the Aztec and Inca cultures, we will similarly look back in our history with horror at the proliferation of abortion. How casually we destroyed millions of human lives in the names of convenience and selfishness. I have a couple final notes to mention here. Recently, Chrissy Teigen posted on Instagram an emotional picture and message explaining that they had lost their son Jack due to miscarriage. The baby, I think, was somewhere around 18 weeks. The outpouring of support and condolences from all corners of the internet was overwhelming, in the tens of millions of responses, and rightfully so. This person had lost a baby. She didn't lose a clump of cells or a potential baby. She lost her son, Jack. We as a society have to understand this, and I believe most people in their hearts do. What else could it be other than a baby? And furthermore, to emphasize that point, I think we understand that as a society we understand this because we have laws that criminally punish people for the destruction of bald eagle eggs. Under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, I'm going to read it here, the first criminal offense is a misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of 1 year in prison and a $100,000 fine. The second offense becomes a felony with a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison and a $250 fine. We're not talking about killing a fully formed bald eagle. We're talking about an egg. My nephew Alexander was a human being at 24 weeks. He was a human being at 20 weeks. He was a human being at 8 weeks. And he was a human being from the moment he was conceived. We understand this with eagles. I sure hope we can understand as a society it's the same for humans. All that said, I know many people who are good practicing Catholics, good friends of mine, who will echo the words of Jeannie Gaffigan, the wife of the comedian Jim Gaffigan, that she wrote in a Jesuit publication, America Magazine, earlier this month on the issue. She said, and I'll quote, "How can we strive to heal the tragedy of abortion without acknowledging the deep wounds and life-threatening cries that drive people to do it? How arrogant are we to condemn women of color living in poverty, faced with the unimaginable and horrific circumstances that would drive them to seek an abortion, without taking a good look at how we have failed them by not offering adequate health care, child care, education, and employment opportunities? Do we ever stop to think of how far we are from achieving a culture of life, in light of the well-documented and video-recorded police brutality against black Americans, our refugee children, homeless pregnant women, or the prisoners on death row, not also society's most vulnerable?" End quote. You know, healthcare, racism, education, childcare, these are all extremely important issues. That said, those are issues with which we can have a debate on the best way to fix them. To just turn a blind eye to the horrors and evils of abortion in the name of a preferred healthcare or education policy is not the answer. We need people, especially people like Jeannie Gaffigan, to stand up to the pro-abortion candidates and say, I really want to support you for all of these reasons, but I cannot because of your abhorrent stance on abortion. And I'm not saying then you have to go support the other candidate if you don't like them. I have not voted in elections for specific offices, even president, where I did not believe that I had a good choice. But to equate the importance of your preferred education or healthcare policy on the same plane as the widespread legal murdering of children is not an honest weighing of the issues. It's with all that in mind that I cannot, under any circumstances, support a candidate who is pro-choice. Just as I could not support a candidate, no matter how much I liked them or hated the person they were running against, who was pro-slavery. And furthermore, if a candidate says, I'm not personally for abortion, but I am not going to infringe my beliefs on a woman and her doctor, that to me is the same thing as saying I would not personally own slaves, but I'm not going to infringe on the rights of someone to own slaves. If you're not personally for abortion, there's probably a good reason for that. And we have to have politicians who can stand up against the radical pro-choice progressives in this country. If all Catholics and all Christians and all other believers stood up and unanimously said with one voice, we will not support any more candidates who are in favor of abortion, politicians would respond. I have a lot of friends who are good practicing Catholics who support many of the positions of certain pro-choice politicians, yet abhor abortion and still vote for those candidates. I am saying, if we all stood up against this, we can make change. If we do not donate another dollar to pro-choice politicians or cast one more vote for them while explaining to them why, we will make progress. If we as Christians band together, regardless of our stance on education, immigration, healthcare, and the like, and make it clear that we will not go along with the pro-abortion movement anymore, we can and we will make change.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from independent realtor Chris Foster. Chris has served clients with everything real estate throughout Iowa since 2019. 641-891-8178 or online at the 4saleia.com.
Support for programming provided by Trappist Caskets, a work of the monks of New Mallory Abbey in Peosta, Iowa. Embracing an honest approach to death can more readily affirm the real meaning of life. Trappist caskets and urns are made in the prayerful environment of the monastery using Iowa-grown wood from the Abbey's sustainable forest. Each casket and urn is blessed by a monk. Quietly laboring with their hands for 175 years, the monks offer workmanship at the pinnacle of woodworker's craft. Available for immediate delivery or as a part of a pre-planning program. Learn more at TrappistCaskets.com. Support for programming provided by Intervisions Healthcare.
Would you like to join our medical team? Intervisions Healthcare, a free and faith-based medical clinic in Des Moines, serves women with unplanned pregnancies. We're looking for a registered nurse to help serve our patients. If you would like to come work for us, we'd love to talk to you. Give us a call today at 515-440-2273. If you're a compassionate, professional nurse looking to help vulnerable pregnant women, give us a call, 515-440-2273.
From Prairie City to Panora and everywhere at iowacatholicradio.com or the Iowa Catholic Radio app. Listener-supported Iowa Catholic Radio, connecting listeners to Christ.
My help comes from you. You're right here.
Welcome back to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I also, first off, thanks for listening to that. It was pretty eye-opening to me as the more I thought about it, the more I wrote those thoughts out. I thought through it, and it made it really did solidify this idea of the importance of life over all other issues. I had to do a quick shout out. Recently, I've lost a dear friend of ours, Father Bob Busher. Father Bob Busher, who we've now buried in Davenport, Iowa. Was a dear friend of ours. He was on the altar for our wedding, helped celebrate our wedding, and has been a dear friend of mine for some time. If you listen to the episode with Cardinal Dolan, you'll know that they were best friends. That's how we got connected with Cardinal Dolan in the first place, and so they met in seminary. And so if you go back and listen to the episode on heroic fatherhood from last year with Cardinal Dolan, you'll hear his thoughts on Father Bob. But Father Bob's one of those men that. You look at what one life can do and the amount of people he touched. And I have people from Des Moines and all over Iowa and Davenport and the whole Davenport diocese that are friends of mine that all randomly know this great man because they had crossed paths with him throughout their lives. And I think often about the impact that one holy priest, one great man can have. And you see that with Father Bob Busher. So I'm going to miss him greatly. He was a great man. Again, one of those people who, when you think of the joy of the priesthood and serving people, he lived it out. He lived his vocation out every day. And we're going to miss him. I know he's in a better place for sure. But so Father Bob, love you. And again, important to pray for our priest and to understand the value that they can have on those around him. And he's just one of those great examples. So thank you for joining me today on Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. I am Joe Stopulos. It's time to Man Up.
Man Up, inspiring men to live out their call to holiness.